I am Dr. Phil Zimbardo, professor of psychology here at Stanford University. Welcome to orientation.
Everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and welcome to one movie discussion that is probably going to focus more on the real life events than some of the events in the movie. Today, we are going to be talking about the Stanford Prison Experiment. Now, that is the name of the film. I'll make a note of what we plan to do with the name of the actual true life study when we bring our guests on. But the Stanford Prison Experiment itself, the movie came out in 2015. Directed by Kyle Patrick Alvarez, based on the book The Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo. So he is credited as a writer. Now, if you're not familiar, Philip Zimbardo is an emeritus professor of Stanford University, and he was the lead author on the study that we will be referring to, and that was portrayed in the film. The screenplay, I believe, is credited to Tim Talbot, however. So Zimbardo has writing credit. Tim Talbot, I think, adapted the Lucifer Effect for the screen. The movie itself stars Billy Crudup as Philip Zimbardo, putting on his best New York, Long Island accent, something like that. And then some key players. Ezra Miller plays an early released prisoner for reasons that we'll talk about in the movie. Ty Sheridan also plays a prisoner that gets a somewhat early release. Olivia Thirlby plays the real Dr. Christina Maslach. At the time of the study, she was Billy Crudup, Philip Zimbardo's girlfriend, and they marry a year later. And then several other people that you actually might be familiar with from other things. So Gaius Charles is in it. I believe he had a role in Grey's Anatomy for a while. And then the biggest guard in this film is played, not the biggest, but the most prolific one, is portrayed by, I believe, yes, Michael Angarano. I don't know if he's been in other things, but he has certainly made his mark on this movie. It's very chilling, actually, the kind of mark that he leaves to the viewer. So, again, dear listener, this discussion is gonna probably be mostly about the real Stanford prison study. And we'll refer to the film quite a bit, but, as it will come up many times in our discussion with our current guest hosts, Zimbardo signed off on this movie. He thinks it's a great adaptation of the Lucifer Effect. He thinks it's a great adaptation of what actually happened. And so if you have not seen this movie, well, first of all, spoiler alert, but second of all, listen to this and then go watch it. I think it might be a better viewing experience if you listen to our discussion today and then go watch it with that context in mind. 90% thereabout of the footage and content in this film, Philip Zimbardo, the real life psychology professor and lead author, lead investigator on the study, signed off on it. 90%, he believes, is accurate to what happened. Now, his memory might be failing. It's been several decades. But you might catch just a little bit of the things that he was trying to convey and ultimately what ended up happening to many of these poor men, college-age men. So let's get right into it. I am excited. Here we go. My guest hosts today are two very wonderful people, Doctors Keli Braitman and Jen Simonds. Keli is a professor and chair, I almost missed that, of psychological science at William Jewell College, just outside of Kansas City. She also serves as the vice president for grants and awards for the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. And Jen is the assistant vice president of academic integrity and accountability. Whoo, Jen, that's a mouthful.
It's a long title.
At the University of Maryland Global Campus, an almost totally online institution for working adults, and serves as the chair of their small IRB. Hey, we share that in common. Previously, she was professor of psychology and department chair at Westminster College in Salt Lake City and chaired the Association for the Heads of Department of Psychology. Heads of Department of Psychology. That's a mouthful, too, where she did meet Keli. So welcome to the show, you two. I am so happy to have you on.
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here.
Now, we first met each other in 2019 at the advanced placement. I almost called it the Association for Psych, an advanced placement psych reading down in Tampa. And we haven't actually seen each other in person since then because of COVID. So how have you both been since then?
Well, I've missed seeing you all in person, but I'm glad that, everybody has found ways to stay in touch during the pandemic. So just trying to, do a good job at work with the students and keep them engaged and stay healthy.
Excellent. And Jen?
Yeah, I feel extremely lucky that 6 months before the pandemic hit, I had moved to Maryland and taken a position with a mostly online institution where people already telework 2 days a week. So going remote was like super easy for us. And had I been at my prior institution that was very face-to-face, small liberal arts college, it would have been a lot more challenging. And so it was just this really wild happenstance that I was just in an easier position. Plus, I love staying home. And so it was okay by me.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, some of this was definitely not okay
Right.
by me, but I was already using DoorDash and Instacart. I was already taking music lessons online.
So Jen, what you're saying is that you had a premonition back in 2019 and you were like, I have things that I need to do.
Right. I mean, yeah, my motto has been, it was then apartment as Disneyland and now it's house as Disneyland. And I just really, and actually part of it was getting the microphone that I am using in this recording. And I set up a recording booth in a closet in my apartment.
Wow.
That's awesome. I mean, the serendipity of your decisions prior to the pandemic just really worked out.
It was wild.
All right, you two, we have a lot to discuss in this episode. And so I think what we should just do is move straight into it because we're all psychologists and we all know the story about Stanford and Philip Zimbardo. So let's jump in. So we're watching in this film fictionalized version of the Stanford Prison Experiment. And I'm going to make an editorial decision from here on out that it's not an experiment. And it's even called out in the movie, which I think is my favorite part of the movie.
So good.
That it's not an experience. And so we're going to refer to it as an experience. So this study
I think that's perfect.
is an experience that I don't think many people want to repeat. Whether those men are still alive, I don't think any of them want to go down that road again.
Great.
So let's first start out with your initial thoughts on the film, and then we'll talk about psychology coming to life and go through some of the nitty-gritty stuff. So I'll let you two give your initial thoughts about the film, and then I'll sort of bookend that with mine. So Jen, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Sure. I thought it was well done as a film. And I read a number of reviews because I was thinking, okay, we psychologists, I've watched clips from this. I've known about this for a really long time, but I'm curious about how do people who don't know about this say. And I agreed with their perspective, that it really looks like a documentary. They really capture the claustrophobia of it. And any of us with PhDs in psychology, some with masters in psychology, depending on the kind of research they did, are familiar with cramped research quarters. And I think it like feels like a psychology building. It feels like cramped research quarters. It really had that real feel to it. And I also thought they placed things really well. I thought the opening credits really placed things well in the early 70s. And I particularly noted the rubber cement, and I was a child in the 70s. And yes, bring on the rubber cement. So, but I thought costume wise, placement wise, set decoration. I thought they really captured everything really well. A lot of times films will really have some anachronistic costuming or hairstyles or something, but I thought they really captured things well. So they set it well. And I thought it flowed real well. I thought the acting was really strong. Yes. And they spent all that time in that small space, and the ensemble feel of it really came through. And so, overall, I was impressed as a film. I mean, of course, with a lot of back knowledge. I mean, I have watched so many of the original footage so many times, but I thought it was really brought to life well.
Yeah, I agree. Keli, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Jen. And the film is 6 or 7 years old now. And this was the first time I had watched it. I hadn't seen it when it came out. And in part just because, like Jen said, we've seen the footage so much that I really just thought, is this going to be entertaining or do I know all of this? And truthfully, it was a little boring because it felt so accurate. It felt so in line with what I've seen on YouTube and, when we've watched it in class. And I was like, oh yeah, that's literally what they said in that, in the footage.
Right.
But seeing it dramatized did bring it to life a little bit more for me. And watching it play out, I feel even more angry having seen it, than I even felt, just seeing the footage or reading about it. And I think especially as a mom to imagine, because I have a 13-year-old and she watched it with me and she rarely puts down her phone. She's watching TikTok all the time, but she was so engrossed in this film that she set her phone down and she was pretty captivated. So I forget sometimes how dramatic it can feel if you don't know the backstory to this. But as a mom, I was really angry for how those students were mistreated. And especially knowing, the protocols and the procedures that we put in place. And then seeing how none of that was really, done well was really frustrating.
I agree with that. And just to add to a little bit of what you said, Keli, about your 13-year-old. So my wife Astrid watched it with me, and she knows a little bit about the backstory too, just through marital osmosis. And she was extremely captivated as well. Just gobsmacked the entire time, like aghast, jaw on the floor kind of way. And I first watched it. Didn't watch it when it came out in 2015, but I first watched it with my history of psych class because I was like, this movie is perfect to discuss the history of ethics and social psychology. So, pulled double duty there. So I always knew that it was going to be on this show eventually. And so I'm glad the two of you were like, yeah, let's do it. As far as my thoughts on the film, I thought it was an amazing portrayal of real life events, and as you mentioned, Jen, documentary feeling. So reviews that come out from the people who are like, I thought I was watching a documentary on a psych experiment, and I think that's completely accurate with the way that they sort of kept it going. And at no point was I like, man, what's going to happen next? I mean, like you both said, we kind of knew what was going to happen because Zimbardo decided to film it all. I don't know if that was a good choice or a bad choice on his part, but he did. And so we're left with a comparison, and it's quite a stark comparison. And Jen, you mentioned about the claustrophobia, and I wanted to specifically bring that up too, because one of the things that I pointed out to Astrid while they were watching, because I also pay attention to like film techniques and these kinds of things, is they were always zoomed in on the prisoner and guards' faces. And when a filmmaker uses that film technique, they want the audience to feel uneasy, because nobody is that close to anybody's face unless you're like about to kiss them. So,
or you're in The Sopranos, or, you know, those films where they have people stand way too close. NCIS, like so many of them, they have people stand way too close.
But even in those cases, like the shot is away from the two of them, right? So it's two people who are in the shot that are far too close to each other. And that's obviously for people who like their personal space, like, whoa, back it up. But in this one, it's the camera right up in the face. And so for Ezra Miller's character, 8612, you're constantly up in his face. Like, oh, I see Ezra Miller's nose hairs. Or the guard, the mean guard. I can't think of his name right now, but the John Wayne character, as he was called, just in his mustache. And you essentially feel this along with watching it. So I thought it was a good film. Definitely a sleeper, under the radar kind of movie. Not a lot of people have seen it, so you know.
When Billy Crudup was
nerds.
wonderful.
He was.
Oh, so good and not bad. Even as Phil Zimbardo, not bad to look at.
Right?
Indeed.
Yeah, he really brought some charisma to the role.
He did. Although Zimbardo has complained that he didn't use his hands enough, because Zimbardo's Sicilian, and you know, Zimbardo has said that they did not exaggerate what's in this film. You know, it's interesting, his commentary. I mean, we'll get to those kinds of things, but in terms of Billy Crudup, is it pronounced Crudup?
I pronounce it Crudup.
Crudup, yeah, I don't know, but in terms of his acting, that was Zimbardo's commentaries. Like, he did a good job, but he's like,
not enough.
Leave it to somebody.
Not enough Sicilian. Yeah. Leave it to Z. I'll just keep calling him Z.
Leave it to somebody who has garnered, you know, that kind of ego over the decades. Like, nah, I don't think this good actor acted me very well.
And the irony, he's critiquing the portrayal of the personality versus the situation.
Yes.
Right.
Irony of ironies.
Yeah, exactly. So as we mentioned at the top, we are all instructors of psychology, and we have likely come across this experience in one way or the other. So the next question I have for the two of you is, in your teaching, how have you explored and explained this, we'll call it important instance in psychological research, whether or not the findings are any good, that's notwithstanding. But nevertheless, we do talk about it in class. So my question to you both is, how have you approached it in the past or currently?
Sure. I only ever discussed it in ethics and research methods, and teaching research methods is one of my just life passions. And so I would discuss it as an ethical violation, and alongside Tuskegee, you know, it was right up there with those things. And one of the biggest things I highlighted was the dual role issue with Zimbardo, both being the superintendent of the prison and being the principal investigator. And so that was like, to me, that's just it's like the core issue. But that's the only time. And I used to show the footage. And then once the exposés started coming out, and I believe after this film came out, I stopped showing the footage. And I told the students, you know, if you want to look it up, you can look it up, but I'm not going to show it because it's even more problematic than just looking at the original footage. There's so much behind it that it's even worse than we knew. And with research assistants and other and participants coming forward and talking about their experiences, it gets worse and worse. In fact, I even watched something today that was another revelation that was just, everything makes it worse about how much manipulation went on.
And not the good kind of experimental
not the good kind, not experimental manipulation, which we'll get to talking about that like extreme problem, why we're calling it an experience and not an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I was just so appalled that I couldn't even show the footage anymore at a certain point. And one of the most interesting reactions was early on in my college teaching career. I showed it and we talked about it. And then the student said, "Oh, well, so did Zimbardo get kicked out of the field and is not allowed to practice?" I'm like, "No, he became president of the American Psychological Association."
And not that long ago. I mean, it was in the 2000s.
And not that long ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of friends of mine when we were in graduate school went to the APA meeting in Honolulu and danced around with him. He didn't dance, but they danced with him, and he was just standing there awkwardly moving with his cane because he's a very old man now. Keli, what about you?
Well, and that makes me think about most of the students, when we talk about Zimbardo, most of the students that I have in my classes know him best from his intro psych film series.
Yes.
And they're like, "Is that host that I used to watch in high school?" So I think they're more familiar with him that way than they are with his study. I do talk a little bit about it in my intro psych class when we get into the social psych chapter, but I mainly present it in a historical context when we talk about how, there was this debate in psychology about the relative contributions of personality and the social situation. And so there was research going on to look at, situational factors and the role that plays. And here's a study that people talk about, and I'll talk about it with you. And the students, I really don't spend a lot of time on it. It's in their textbook, so they probably, read more about it. But they really start jumping in and critiquing it. I think they take away less about the role of the situation than they do just, all of the issues that they see with the research. And I think especially as college students, they can relate to it. They can imagine being in that situation. And so I think they get offended when we talk about, they had police cars pull up and arrest them when they weren't expecting it and take them away. And one of the things I didn't realize until I saw the film was that I think they felt like, it wasn't going to be as big of a deal as it turned into. So one of the students, when he was getting taken away, in the film, said to his brother, like, "Oh, it's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. Tell mom I won't be home for dinner." And then it turned into what it turned into. And so, I think college students hearing about this study can kind of put themselves in that place and recognize a lot of the issues and concerns with it. But the other thing that really bothers me about it is, and Milgram's study too, the more we learn and know about all of the problems with that research, why does it continue to be in all of the textbooks when there's so much good psychology research that we don't pay attention to? And how do we get to the point where we're not spending as much of our time talking with students about poorly done research?
Yeah, I heartily agree with Keli. Like, I think it should be removed from all intro textbooks. I think the only place it belongs is in the ethics chapter of research methods textbooks.
Yeah, that would be fine with me. I presented in a similar way to what you described, Keli. I don't regularly teach social, and I'd much rather talk about real things that happened without any influence from psychology when I talk about the the power of the situation kind of thing. And I bring up Abu Ghraib. I know my students don't have an idea of what I have to describe what the military did at the beginning of the Iraq War in 2003, but I'd much rather talk about that than this. And when I have the time to, same thing with you, Jen, is I talk about how this is, in the 1970s, about the time when the United States government was like, wow, we probably should regulate this somehow. We're expecting the Belmont Report coming out in this decade. The APA really figures out, maybe we should do something at the research level and make these IRBs, as you and I are chairs of, Jen. So I always put it into that context. I've periodically shared a clip or two from the original research, specifically the 8612 clip of him having his breakdown with a content warning. So my students know that this is going to be some pretty heavy stuff, and if they need to leave, they need to leave.
Guys, seriously? You don't know. I gotta go. To a doctor. Anything.
And present it in a way that, like, if you push people to their limits, they're probably going to break. And you see that in this film as kind of like a buildup of, it's not a big deal, as you said, Keli. It's not a big deal. We'll be fine. They're gonna let it. It's the guards aren't. They're F-ups. It's fine. They're same guys as you and me. And then things start getting wild and crazy because of, one or two guards who are like, I am high with power. So, but like I said, I'd much rather talk about real life situations where that is the case. Nazis, Abu Ghraib, that kind of thing. So let's jump into the film. Let's first describe the situation for anyone who is listening who's never heard of it and just wants to know. In the intro for the both of you, I said that any listener should listen to our discussion first, even if they haven't seen the film, so they can watch with this kind of lens, because I think that's incredibly important. Otherwise, it almost seems like a fictional film, and I don't want people to think that it's a fictional film. When Zimbardo comes out and says, "Yeah, almost all of it is accurate." Like that pains me to my core that anybody thinks that any of these things were, because they're not going to go look up what Zimbardo said about it. They're not even going to, look up who Philip Zimbardo is. They're going to take the film's word for it at the end with the scroll across the screen saying it only lasted 6 days and not 2 weeks, all of that stuff. They're not going to go investigate. So I want listeners who haven't seen it before to take my advice and listen to us talk about it, and then go watch it and kind of and sort of grapple with the information from there, because it's real life and it was really crappy. So Philip Zimbardo was a professor at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. And he was a social psychologist who was interested in, pretty much, in my opinion, trying to ride coattails a little bit from Milgram in the previous decade. That's my reading of it as a younger person.
I agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
He mentions it as well. Zimbardo mentions it in interviews where
Oh, okay.
Milgram was not too far behind that. I mean, it was a while before, but still, it was in people's memories. Wanted to study the power of authority.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you catch the red buzzer at the beginning of the intro? Did you see the nod to Milgram with the red buzzer?
I did not.
But I saw in a documentary or a series that they mentioned they drew back to the red buzzer, and I had not noticed the red buzzer initially.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Good catch, Keli. I like that. So Zimbardo wants to figure out how the situation changed personality, as Keli described. It was a I would say classic conundrum in social psychology. I mean, even well before 3 decades before, people like Kurt Lewin were talking about the person inside their situation. So it was a seminal debate in social psych, and he wanted to know more. So he set up a prison in the basement of the psychology building, which was, 1950s, 60s severe architecture where the basement looks very crappy and scary.
And And it is typical of many psychology departments around the
Exactly.
U.S. and
To this day.
perhaps in
To
other
this
countries.
day.
To this
Yeah,
day.
they're not.
To this day.
The psychology, I guess, doesn't bring in enough money to prompt donors to be like, you deserve a new building.
Yes. Although I had a friend who was a postdoc at Stanford in psychology, and an interior decorator came to ask him what feel he wanted in his lab. So I think they
Wow.
have more money
They-
now for lab space at Stanford. Well, that was 10 years ago or so, but
I mean, fair enough, but
Nice.
he does say that those were faculty offices down in the basement that they converted to jail cells.
Mhm.
So, oh boy, feel bad for the faculty in that. Whether they were probably adjunct offices.
Well, I will say that
Yes.
until recently, my psychology department was in the basement of the library. So we were underground with windowless offices.
Oh,
and
no.
It felt very much like what we saw in the film. Now we have been moved upstairs in a new building, so we have sunlight now.
Congratulations.
That's a
Thank you.
win.
Thank
I'll
you.
tell you what. I mean, you should not have an office without a window. I think that should be mandatory. But
We
in
were
any
safe
case,
when the tornado came through. So
well, that's true.
Always looking on the bright side, Kelly.
So he sets up this experiment, quote unquote, and via coin flip from 24, although 24 men are not presented in the movie because there are 9 prisoners and what appears to be 9 guards. So that's 18.
That seems like dramatic license because it would be difficult to film 12 and 12.
Yeah, probably.
I agree.
It's funny though, because if you go look at the tagline on IMDb, which has the official tagline or whatever they're called, of the movie, it says 24 male students. So it's like, but 24 aren't in the movie, but okay, all right, whatever. So it sets them up, coin flip, guards, coin flip, who's going to be prisoner. And as Kelly said, they round them up in fake police cars, which has to be traumatic to anyone else around. Like the only one they show in the film is of Ezra Miller's character, 8612. And he's outside washing his car. You know, he can't even take his ID with him or anything like that. They just grab him. He's probably
with
well
his
known.
brother, his little brother.
He's in front of his little brother. But even outside of that, like people in the neighborhood are outside at the same time because it's summertime. It's nice in Palo Alto, and you know they just grab him. You don't do that. That's not cool. I know we're getting into the ethics of
I will
that,
also note,
but
okay, we'll comment on this during the IRB
Sure.
portion of our
Yeah.
discussion.
So he has them come down into the basement. The guards get uniforms. The prisoners get dresses and skull caps, or pantyhose, I guess is what it looked like to me. I don't know what other kind.
It's the cheap wig
cap.
by
Gotcha.
the way. For those of us who've done theater, you can either buy a wig cap or you can just cut some pantyhose.
I thought they were pantyhose too, Alex.
They were pantyhose.
They were pantyhose.
No, really.
Okay.
It looks like, no, it's pantyhose. And that's something that when you wear wigs for theater, you cut pantyhose unless
Okay.
you want to go and buy an actual wig
Gotcha.
cap that look like pantyhose.
Well, you learn something new every day. TIL. Exactly.
Little bonus community theater tips.
So, and they get dresses. And in the movie, Zimbardo is telling one of the characters that he wants to remove all aspects of their masculinity from them, all aspects of their identity. So burlap dresses and pantyhose on their heads, and they're required to wear them.
Say, I did not understand the point of the movie or the study where they're trying to remove all of their masculinity. I didn't see the connection. I mean, I saw it acted out, referring to them as ladies and she, but I didn't see the connection unless they were just saying this is what it's like in prison. They,
I think they were taking the de-individuation and just going farther with it. And it really was, like if they were trying to simulate prison conditions, nobody's wearing dresses or pantyhose in prison.
Mm-mm.
They're wearing pants.
They're wearing pants. They get shoes.
they get shoes. They are allowed eyeglasses. They are allowed medications. They're allowed to see a doctor if they're not feeling well. I mean, we will get into this farther, but we're still in the synopsis phase.
I gotta.
Sorry, Alex.
But it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. No, it's so hard. I'm so mad. Like, I'm always so mad when I talk about this.
That's okay. Breaking up synopsis is always good. Otherwise, it's just boring. So, a period of a couple of days. Now, it's in the basement, so the idea is that there is shift change guards, so 3 guards to 9 prisoners. Shift changes every 8 hours is what it looks like. But the prisoners, there's no clock. They're not aware of what time it is. So, and the viewer is also not aware of how much time has passed. And so that also adds to the whole anxiety building of it. Not only is the camera right up in these people's faces, but we're just as clueless as the prisoners are to what's going on the outside world. And so a day goes by. There's a lot of what do we want to call it? Some good old fashioned nonviolent disobedience from some of the prisoners. They realize that especially when John Wayne comes in, that the guards aren't going to be friendly. They're not going to be nice. They're going to be real big old jerks. And so they figure out all of these ways. Go ahead.
You want to explain what you mean by John Wayne?
Oh, yeah. So John Wayne was one of the guards who decided to take it upon himself, because there was no direction really given to these guards, although in real life there was a lot of direction given. But in the movie, no direction is given to the guards on how to act. And so this character of John Wayne, who is just, a normal guy, kind of short, who once he puts on the glasses, he changed his accent a little bit, got a little bit of drawl going on. And just started being a real asshole.
And here's a couple of interesting things. The movie Cool Hand Luke was mentioned as an influence both of the John Wayne character and of the reason why they wore glasses. Right. They're like, we're going to wear mirrored sunglasses like in Cool Hand Luke. I also thought it was interesting that the original John Wayne was a tall figure who was a more physically imposing figure. And they chose a short actor, which as a short person, I'm like, all right, go short actors. But I also wondered, how much that was to exaggerate the psychological manipulation. Entirely
possible. Although from the real clips of that guard talking to 8612, he does look kind of short, but they're sitting. So it's hard to tell. Yeah. But it's so interesting. Maybe I inferred it as from watching all the old clips. Maybe when he's sitting, that he was a physically imposing figure. Oh, the two of them in the 8612
in that way.
In the clip or in the movie?
He loomed over the others. Yeah.
I thought he loomed over. I thought he was tall.
Mm-hmm. They look lanky regardless. Granted, it's been a few.
Well, they're all like, college age males.
Yeah, from
many of whom are lanky.
Northern California. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So to speed up the synopsis a little bit more, all hell breaks loose over the next few days. Several prisoners have breakdowns. The guards just keep going and going and going.
Good evening, gentlemen. How about we make this one a night to remember? You mean to tell me that you spent all day long in that stinking hole because you wouldn't eat 2 lousy little sausages? God damn, boy. Well, maybe you want us to take them sausages and cram them up your ass, huh? Bet you like that, 416, won't you?
Just because you have no friends doesn't mean you have to make everyone else suffer, 416.
New guy. Look at me. There you go. The hell is your problem, boy, huh?
My problem is that the guards and the people running this experiment are not treating the prisoners like human beings.
The hell has that got to do with sausages, huh?
The guards and the experimenters are clearly...
You address me as Mr. Correctional Officer.
Mr. Correctional Officer, the guards and the experimenters are clearly in violation of the rules set up for this experiment, and I refuse to endorse an unfair system.
What did you expect, boy? Huh? What the fuck did you expect? Did you expect this to be a fucking nursery school? Huh? Is that what you thought this was gonna be? You thought you were gonna get some playtime in the yard, boy?
Until eventually, a few people tell Phil Zimbardo to put a stop to it. And at the end of the film, there is a moment where the John Wayne character is just going way too far with his actions, that he comes down and he's like, it's over. And they're just like looking at him blankly. Like, what do you mean it's over? The Stanford County Prison doesn't make sense, by the way. There's no county prisons. A Stanford County Prison is closed. And they kind of just look at each other like, oh, okay. Time to go then. And we get a little bit of a scrawl at the end about some of the stuff that happens post experience. And then we get some, I guess we'll call them during credit scenes that are recreations of the post experiment, quote unquote, interviews and discussions between the prisoners and the guards. And then the film ends and you're left with like, wow, that happened. So yeah, this is what people really did for psych studies. I want to join. Now I wonder how many people saw that and were like, I want to be a psychologist.
Right. Although, was it 8612 who became a prison psychologist?
I don't know that one.
Yeah, actually, I think so. Know. Actually, I will quickly Google this, but I believe I remember from one of the documentaries.
That would be quite the change, but also really great, kind of inspiring. That he took an experience and went with it. One thing I do want to note before we jump into some of the more specific stuff is there is a character in the film, a black man who served time. I think he said 15 years at San Quentin. If you're not familiar with San Quentin is a maximum security prison just north of San Francisco, sort of in the Marin Headlands area. So just north of that. It's actually quite close to the water, to the bay. You could, if you could break out of San Quentin, you could get into San Francisco, the northern parts of San Francisco Bay rather quickly. Not as quickly as if you were in Alcatraz, of course, but it's fairly close. And so he has this guy come in as a what's the word? Consultant. Thank you. He has him come in as a consultant. Plays a role on the parole board, ends up not granting somebody parole when they asked for it, ended up quitting because he did not like what he became by not granting a guy parole, which probably was an experience that he had in San Quentin. Okay, Keli, you were going to add something.
Oh, well, we were talking about, what happened later on in the John Wayne character. I was reading up on him and, he's a married father of 3 and he does something in finance. He's like a financial advisor. So he did not go the same route as the prisoners going into work in the prison system. He focused on finance. So I just thought that was interesting.
And I just confirmed, I just looked it up. 8612 did become a prison psychologist at the San Francisco County Jail.
Oh, that is awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where Zimbardo messed up. You don't call it a county prison. That just doesn't exist in the United States.
It does not. It's county jail or state prison.
Federal prison. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
This
federal,
guy.
Right. Mm-hmm. This guy.
Okay, let's jump into the ethics of this because I think that's the thorniest part, other than just nasty human nature, of course. But Jen, you mentioned the dual role that Zimbardo played. So if you could explain that a little bit more, and then what are the other ethical issues?
So the dual role is, so when you're a principal investigator, I mean, if you are being a responsible scientist, you have a priori in advanced hypotheses. They are clear. They have clear variables. You have a clear protocol that you will follow. And if you are truly doing an experiment, you only manipulate one or limited number of variables at a time in different ways. And so the problem is, and Zimbardo, Stanford, there's a lot of pressure. And I can't remember if it was my grad school advisor or who it was who said, I wouldn't wish being a professor at Stanford on anyone because they're pressured to come up with brilliant ideas all the time. And there's a lot of public pressure because of the notoriety of the institution to do famous things. And so Zimbardo is under institutional pressure to do famous things. And I think it's person by situation. By the way, I'll keep bringing up person by situation because, this artificial dichotomy of situation and person is ridiculous. Although it was hotly debated a long time. One of my areas is personality psychology. And so, person by situation. But anyway, there was a situation where, somebody who is interested in being famous, who is at an institution that wants to be famous. So Zimbardo, and what's interesting is Zimbardo has said, they didn't exaggerate what was happening in this film. And Zimbardo in this film kept on manipulating everything to pull results, to keep pulling results and to have things happening. And when you're a principal investigator, you're invested because your career lives or dies on your publications in the, as we quote, the most excellent publications and being first author in the most excellent publications. And so here he is motivated not only to keep his job as a professor at Stanford, but also to be famous and to bring something of fame to Stanford and to have this groundbreaking social psychology thing. So he's so motivated by the results. And so it's completely irresponsible of him to make decisions as the prison superintendent. And so what really should have been done is there should have been clear instructions that were provided to the superintendent where anybody could have played the superintendent, and here are your rules. I'll tell you, my first experience, true experiment, and I was so geeky and I believed everything that I read in my research methods textbooks, and I had not yet worked at a large research university, that I was so pure in my experiment that I had people in the experimental condition who were not at all experienced in the topic. I gave them a script. I gave them rules. I mean, it was as pure as it's like so pure. So watching this, it made me even more infuriated because it's like the lengths that I went to not allow any other variables to enter into the experimental condition were just like, they were extraordinary measures. Now I see, because people usually don't go that far.
Right.
But the dual role issue is here you've got the scientist who is motivated for fame and for protecting a job. I mean, protecting a job is difficult. And for those who don't know, that getting a job in academia and keeping a job in academia is dependent on publications above all in large research universities like Stanford. And that is really what, people live or die on their publications. And so here's Zimbardo who has this opportunity. So he's just really motivated for that. And so he acted really improperly as the superintendent. Here's couple of really interesting points about, at that point, this is so pre-Belmont report. So in 1976, work began 5 years after Stanford Prison Experiment, or not experience, Stanford Prison sort of simulation.
Yeah.
Discussions began of the Belmont report. Many people came together and the report was published in 1979. And that led to the modern research ethics that we use today. At that point, there was a human subjects form, and you can look up the human subjects form for the Stanford prison. It was called, it had some vague title about situations and people, blah, blah, blah. Here's a couple of interesting points. One, it was listed as an observational study.
Oh.
So even on their application, it said observational study.
Wow.
It wasn't even listed as an experiment.
Oh my gosh.
Second of all, it said no deception would be used. And in a recent interview with Dave Eshelman, who was the John Wayne character, he said that they were never told as the guards that they were part of the experiment. They said only the prisoners were part of the experiment, and the guards were not told. They were just instructed what to do because the prisoners were the ones who were being observed. The other thing is they said they could hear the experimenters through the wall commenting on what they were doing. And so something called demand characteristics, which is participants in experiments and other types of studies, if they get an inkling of what the investigators are looking for, they will try to help them. They will try to okay, this is what they want. This is how I am a good person. And Dave Eshelman has said, Zimbardo made it clear what we needed to do. Also, you see in the film all of the different encouragement of really trying to amp up the guards and really trying to manipulate what the guards were doing. But it's interesting if you go back to those documents, also in the informed consent, there was no informed consent for being publicly arrested. That was not part of the informed consent. The informed consent form, you can find that online as well. Very limited, extremely limited. And they also referred to the contract about not being physically assaulted. I couldn't find the contract online. And here's it's controversial about. So Zimbardo said nothing was added for dramatic effect. Some people are saying that they didn't actually physically assault them, but I think these things are really at odds with each other. And I think all the exposés have really pointed to that there was physical assault.
Yeah. Keli, what did you spot in the...
Well, I was just going to add the physical assault, even the fire extinguisher, on the second morning when they led the rebellion and then the guards intervened by spraying them with a fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
That really happened. So I don't think they can claim that there was no physical assault and, making them do push-ups and having prisoners sit on each other when they were doing push-ups. And I don't know if they hit them in the way that they did in the film, but.
Right. Yeah, you could probably make an argument no guard used their baton on somebody's face, but it's really difficult to say that the other stuff doesn't constitute physical harm. Not to even scratch the surface on psychological and emotional harm. Right. So, Keli, what else did you spot as unethical or discuss in your classes as unethical in this simulation?
I guess in terms of ethics or methodology flaws, they put an ad in the paper, saying that they were doing a study on prison life. And so I think already, Jen talked about demand characteristics, but when you talk about bias in terms of the sample too, you already have Yale College students who are answering an ad about a study of prison life. And so, that's a pretty unique personality set. And his colleague in the film, when his colleague Jim walked in and said, this is a frightful sight. What is your independent variable? And Zimbardo became really defensive and deflected in terms of saying, you're not questioning the academics of my work, are you? So he kind of had that classic personality of shutting down anybody who was trying to question the ethics of what he was doing. And then you had, anytime his research assistants would say, I'm concerned, maybe we should end this, he would raise his voice and say, no, don't. And so he just shut down all discussion of any kind of feedback. So that was a concern. I agree with Jen. There was no detailed informed consent, and it was pretty clear that the students didn't know, what was going to happen. Jen mentioned earlier, taking away their glasses, not letting them smoke cigarettes when they were smokers. So they were going through withdrawal. One of them was upset because he couldn't have his vitamins. They were sleep deprived. I don't know if the informed consent, talked about how you were going to be sleep deprived. But I think what bothered me the most was they wanted to leave. A number of them said so many times, I want out. I don't want to be here anymore. And Zimbardo was saying things like, he could be faking it. Should we deny his request?
Come on, look at you. You tell me you can't handle what? Some push-ups, some jumping jacks, guys calling you names. Come on. Tell you what, I'll talk to the guards and tell them to go easy on you, all right?
Would you do that?
Phil, I think we're done here. Take him away.
Wait. No, I'm not done here.
And I think they really started, I mean, everybody's talked about this. They really started to believe that they were in a prison and they couldn't leave. And when they advocated for themselves, they were still not permitted to leave. And I just thought it was really disturbing when they had that visit, the parent and friends visit. And parents came in and significant others came in and acted like their kids, their sons and daughters and girlfriends or boyfriends were in jail. They went along with it. It just felt to me like it seemed so real that everybody was falling in line and really treating it like they were in prison and they weren't allowed to leave. And in that scene, when that one mom was raising questions about it, and Zimbardo's response to her was, is your son too weak to handle this? And the dad became really defensive. Oh, no, he'll be fine. He's not weak. That was strange. And bringing the priest in, he just introduced all of these elements that made no sense to me. I couldn't figure out, what is he trying to do here? Is he just throwing?
It honestly sounded like a couple of high school students got together and thought about, oh yeah, and then we'd have this experiment, and then we'd have this, and then we'd have this, and then we'd have this, and like, yeah, they'll visit, and they'll have all, and then a priest will come. It sounds ridiculous.
It sounds like, Jen.
Haphazard.
Yeah, it sounds like those two high school kids in your little analogy here just watched a bunch of prison movies and we're like, this is how prison is, right? Duh. And let's just do it on our own.
Yeah, and then we'll have this, and then we'll have this. And it's kind of like, actually, all of us researchers, we always start out with too grand of an idea, and then we always pare it down into, what's possible and what's feasible, what's ethical, what's these things. And so this is like, nobody stopped them whatsoever. They started with their big grand idea and they just kept going with all this stuff. And it's just like, there's so much contamination. It's ridiculous, but also just so troublesome. And the informed consent, by the way, so it's modern informed consent does have, voluntary participation as a principle where you can leave at any time. If you say you want to leave, you need to leave. But this informed consent form did not say that. It did say, though, that you could get medical attention. And so there was a violation of that informed consent form when they asked for a doctor and they could not see the doctor. So that was one thing that was in direct contradiction to the actual form. But the modern protections were not in place about voluntary participation.
To your point about the parents and other loved ones visiting, Keli, the one thing that I noted in that scene with the mother and the father of, I guess it was 819 or 619, played by Ty Sheridan, when Zimbardo's like, is your son too weak? And then he looks at the dad and it just engaged all just gross forms of toxic masculinity toward that and sexist behavior toward that poor mother who is just concerned about her son. And it's like, I'm not even going to talk to you, woman. I'm going to address the father here because he's a man, you're not. And we're talking about a man and we're men. We're men. And then, of course, the dad doesn't want to appear weak toward Zimbardo. So he's like, yeah, he can handle it. He's fine. Like, that's your friggin' son.
Yeah. A quest for, toxic masculinity and quest for fame were the two big, the fire and the match, or the gas and the match, I would say, of the ways that toxic masculinity was used. It was throughout the film. I mean, throughout the experience of the dresses, of the homophobic Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. So there was the reenactment where you're the Frankenstein, you're the Bride of Frankenstein, and you have to get very close. And having prisoners reenact these homoerotic scenes. So toxic masculinity was just a really strong theme throughout this. And it's interesting. And I don't know if it was a choice of the filmmakers to draw it out, or it's just there was so much of it there in the previous footage and in any of the documentation of the study. It'd be interesting to hear from the filmmakers about, did they choose to enhance that? Or was it so much of it there? Did they downplay, how much of it was there?
Yeah, the film
That
ends
would
up
be
being
interesting.
2 hours, and I'm sure they could have gone longer.
Yes.
Well,
but then I would have wanted to punch more people.
Well, and to Jen's point about the homoerotic scene, out of all of the things that happened in the film that were really inappropriate and unethical, that's what in the film they depicted, that's what put Zimbardo over the edge to end it. All of the other stuff that happened, he was letting it go. And in fact, he lied, to the prisoner and was like, I'll tell the guards to take it easy on you, which he had no intent of doing. And he let all of that go.
Well, there was one, so it's on one of the sites about the study, and it said one of the biggest inaccuracies in the film was that it was ended when the at the time girlfriend who became Zimbardo's wife, who was, we will note, in dual role form, a former student of Zimbardo's.
Indeed.
Which we can go back to, but
just to interject one real quick, she also ends up playing a role within the study too.
Yeah, she does. She's on the parole board.
Yeah.
But there was like the one big inaccuracy that is noted on that site about, was it real? Was the fictionalized version real? And they said, well, the difference was he ended it when she said it had gone too far.
Right.
And so I think and it's interesting though, again, like, did they enhance the toxic masculinity and make that choice in the film that they went beyond her warning? They did the warning in the film, like she planted the seed that these are boys, not prisoners. And then he saw the homoerotic stuff and then he decided to end it, so maybe there was a decision on the filmmaker's part to do that. But I thought that was an interesting choice in the film because it wasn't. And Zimbardo has said, she pointed out, like in his, I think it maybe was in, I forget which interview, but, he said that she pointed out that it had gone too far and he ended it.
Yeah, I thought that I had read that several people had mentioned to him that it's going too far. And they kind of show it in different places in the movie. The consultant character leaves after he makes a poor decision about denying parole when he was in that position himself. And then Christina Maslach coming in and saying, hey, they're just boys. I think that all kind of, as a viewer, I think we needed a conflict resolution, of course. It's a narrative, it's a story. So it had to come out as somebody telling him to do it, which also plays a role in some ways as us feeling sorry for him. The audience going, oh, that poor guy. That poor Philip
felt that way.
Zimbardo.
I didn't either.
Well, we know better.
Right. But maybe actually, Kelly, you could ask your daughter, Alex, ask your wife.
Well, she knows she knows better.
She knows too much,
yeah.
right? She knows, right. But yeah, actually it would be interesting, did they feel any sympathy for this character?
That's a good question.
Yeah, and I would say that that general audiences could potentially feel some sympathy. Maybe not like, oh, boo-hoo, he didn't get to complete his research, but like, oh, he was grappling with something, and we've all been in that situation where we've had to make tough choices. That's all I'm saying. Like,
right.
He is attempted to be redeemed by the filmmakers.
Right. I think they dramatized that well, where like she plants the seed and then he really is thinking about it, and then he just sees confirmation of that. And that's the moment.
And it's build up too, right? Because that scene seems like it's going on for far too long. Cuts between what's happening in the prison, cuts between Zimbardo in the control room, and back and forth. And he's getting more and more agitated until he finally goes, I got to rush down there.
And that scene was
and
really
so
well
it's
acted, I thought.
yes, it was
Oh,
that
so
tension
well
was
done.
palatable. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have dual role. We have crappy informed consent. We have holding people against their will. I mean, Zimbardo could have been charged with kidnapping.
Yes.
And his entire career, I don't think he has reflected on that enough. I think he needs to come out and say, I kidnapped some people.
Well, this is a whole other piece of this, is that Zimbardo still talks about this study as if it yielded valid results.
Right.
And this is really problematic. He will acknowledge the dual role thing. He will say something about it. And then in the next breath, he will talk about the results from the study. In fact, having provided letters for things, having provided commentary on the Abu Ghraib prison, as if this was a valid study and produced actual results.
Right.
I think Zimbardo just has this intense need to be discussed, and all of his research. Are you familiar with the study? It's not as well known, but the study he did with the abandoned cars, one in Palo Alto.
No.
No.
And I call it a study loosely. They had 2 spare cars, so they put one in the Bronx with the windows down and the hood up. And then they put one in Palo Alto with the hood down, the windows were up. It looked like any ordinary car. And the one in the Bronx that with the windows down and the hood up was destroyed within a matter of, I don't know, hours. And the one in Palo Alto sat untouched. And then he decided, well, let's see what happens if I lift the hood of the one in Palo Alto. And so then when it looked like it was an abandoned car, then people came in and took stuff from it. And you just think, what about that is a study? Like nothing about this.
I think Zimbardo needed to go back and take research methods again about experimental manipulation.
Who gave him the Psych 101 video series controls? Oh, my God.
And who elected him president of APA? Who were these voters?
I am Dr. Phil Zimbardo, professor of psychology here at Stanford University. Welcome to orientation. You're going to be very pleased to know that you all have been chosen to be the prison guards in this study. And that choice was made based upon the exemplary qualities that you all demonstrated during your interviews. So, good for you. This experiment will be an extension of my research into the effects prisons can have on human behavior. And being that it's summer and the school is almost empty, we should have near complete privacy for this study. And as you'll soon see, we have cleared out some of the teachers' offices and converted them into prison cells. And the hallway will serve as the prison yard. But remember, just as you were watching the prisoners, my graduate staff and I will be watching you. So under no circumstances whatsoever are you to hit or physically assault the prisoners in any way. Now, you'll all be given sunglasses and uniforms to give the prisoners a sense of a unified, singular authority. Once a prisoner is jailed, he will not be able to leave except under established procedures. And from this point forward, you should never refer to this as a study or an experiment again.
So let's talk about the biggest elephant in the room, which is the guards and the ethical lapse of those guards. So in the movie, they are presented as kind of bumbling and sort of idiotic at the beginning. The first shift, as it were, who took in during the intake process of the first, really Ezra Miller's character is the first one to come in, and he has to get deloused, which is a whole thing in my mind. Like Ezra Miller's butt on the screen for a good extended period, but also in the direct shot of the spying camera for the studies. Just like these grown men are in another room looking at the video feed of another grown man's ass. Which I was like, are you kidding me right now? Because in real prison settings, Yeah, you are likely naked while you're getting deloused, but it's in a closed room and nobody's watching you. Maybe like one or two guards there. I thought that was talk about humiliating.
It's another gap in the simulation.
Yeah, exactly. And so the guards seem kind of bumbling, and then the second shift comes, and John Wayne's in it, and he's like, "How did it go?" And they're like, "It's fine." And he's like, "Well, I'm gonna have some fun." So, what was real about that, and what wasn't real about that?
Well, there's the quiet rage footage of actually, I think it was at the end, they actually reenacted it during the credits.
Right.
Of where he's like, I've got my own little experiment going on. And that was the actual person who did it. And so there's a little bit more at work to John Wayne than actually even maybe Dave Eshelman, the actual John Wayne, may say now.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because in the footage, part of that is edited. Part of their discussion is edited. From what I've seen, I don't. At least what has been put out in the public has been edited. Maybe the raw footage is not, and that's what they were copying. But you get this interesting exchange between the John Wayne guard and 8612 when he says, "I was doing my own little experiment," and you kind of get this very incredulous response from 8612, like, "Oh, you were doing your own little experiment?" It's like, yeah, I was doing that. But in the footage that is publicly available, that little bit is cut out. And it goes from him saying, like, "I know you're a nice guy," and "No, you don't." "Yeah, I know you're a nice guy." And then it kind of a camera focus shift, or like a single shot. And so I thought that was very interesting that they cut that out from the original footage. Like, oh, John Wayne was doing his own little game here. That was brand new information.
Well, and I had seen that on YouTube, and and one of the things that I wondered even before I watched this film was how honest was that? Because I could see after the fact, when you realize that this study is going to make some attention and you maybe regret how you behaved and you're trying to paint it in a different light. And so was he trying to cover up some of it by acting like, "Oh, I was doing my own experiment"? Like, was that truly what he was going through his mind at the time? Or was he just giving in to how he was going to behave naturally, and then later was trying to come up with, just trying to, why did I do that? And just coming up with an explanation that he thought others would buy. I've never known if that was genuine.
And what's interesting is the recent interview with him. He's really talking about doing what he knows that Zimbardo wanted, and the demand characteristics being really high. And it may have been that he did not feel comfortable discussing that at that point because he was still under the watchful eye of Stanford and Zimbardo. And maybe he did not feel comfortable saying, I could hear these researchers on the other side of the thing, and they really liked certain things that I was doing. And I know what Zimbardo wanted from me, and I was doing it. But his middle-aged self, is definitely right out there with that. It's like, I was trying to provide the researcher with what he wanted.
Yeah, and that really fueled that really fueled the other guards. They were like, okay, well, I'm going to take a page out of his book and roll with it too. And so the third shift guards did the same thing.
And there's a moment in the film where they're like, yeah, nobody says anything. You can do this.
Yeah.
There was a lot of there was conformity once one person started acting out, the other guards did. And at the beginning, when Zimbardo was congratulating them, when they asked during the screening process, would you rather be guards or prisoners? And every scene, everybody said prisoner. And when you asked why, they said, it's easier. And then somebody else said, nobody likes guards. Nobody wanted to be a guard to begin with. But then when he had them in the room and he was telling them that they were selected to be guards, he congratulated them. And rather than telling them that it was a coin toss, he said, it was because of your
Mhm.
exemplary responses and congratulations.
Mhm.
And so he kind of built
And there
them
was more
up.
deception.
Mm-hmm.
There was more deception that was not noted in the human subjects form.
Oh my God.
And here's and also when it came to the person by situation, it's not as highlighted in this fictionalized version, but it is highlighted more in the original, in the Quiet Rage documentary, that not all guards went along with it, and
Right.
some guards helped the prisoners, and not all prisoners had problems. So we see the worst of the guards and we see the worst of the prisoners, especially highlighted in this film. But the person by situation thing is very strong because not all the guards acted like that, and not all the prisoners had problems.
Right. And that is a good point to bring up, Jen. I'm glad you did, because it highlights that we do focus on some of the more egregious stuff, and we do in other situations too. A lot of bad apples do ruin the bunch, right? But it's still actually incredible how some of them that didn't do anything. I know you mentioned some actually helped the prisoners, but the guards that just didn't do anything.
Right, the apathy was
the apathy.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is also problematic.
Yes, yeah. But I do remember, and now it's been a while since I've seen the Quiet Rage and the footage. But there were some guards who were trying to help the prisoners, not in big measure, but there was some of that. But the apathy, right? The other guards that just stood by and let the other things happen, and so you have the same situation in a variety of reactions, and so that really speaks to person by situation. But they're not even results, so we can't even talk about them as results. We're just noting that we are seeing some footage of some things that happen in a highly manipulated situation. And actually, this really made me think about the bad apples thing, when we talk about police officers and like a few bad apples, but it's rooted in a system. And in this, it was rooted in a system.
And a system that it was completely fictional.
Fictional and highly motivated for one person's gain.
Yeah. Yeah, and the consultant who served time at San Quentin noted that these aren't prison conditions, and Zimbardo basically was like, I want to show these white boys what life is really like. And it's like, okay, you keep changing the rationale for the study. Like, are you trying to show what happens in the power of the situation? Are you trying to show the differences in experiences of majority versus minority people in the United States? What are you trying to do?
I think that's a great
point. And again,
I couldn't tell. He kept changing his story within the movie, what his purpose was. And he just kept saying, these are great results. Or his research assistants would say, you've already got the results, but you have to see this through. Well, what were the results? And I mean, it really is. It just shows how motivated they were to achieve a certain outcome. They were not unbiased in this demonstration.
I will point out that they start with 3 graduate students. The one that you just mentioned, Keli, that says you have to see this through, it looked to be like his most senior graduate student, one who was in the lab for the longest. But midway through the movie, there's a glassed character named Kyle who looks like he's a first-year graduate student and just wants to show his advisor that he can do this and he's ready to go. He disappears halfway through the movie.
Yeah,
he
walked out of the room.
He walks out of the room and he becomes irrelevant for the rest of the story, and you almost forget about his act of defiance.
That's true. Actually, that was a subtle, it was this kind of a subtle move. There was definitely some resistance happening, but it was there as this undertone.
Mm-hmm. And then the final graduate student, played by the guy from Grey's Anatomy, that I can't think of his name right now, Gaius Charles, I think. He went toe to toe with the ex-con. Like, no, this is prison. No, this is bullshit.
Yeah. And he tried, but it's so hard because their ability to get the degree that they are working so hard for is dependent on this principal investigator, their advisor. Like, they ultimately have to go along with it if they want to graduate. And I mean, there's a joke. It's not really a joke. What's the true goal of a dissertation? The goal is to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And that means, and actually always with that comes, like, you just have to agree with some things that people on your committee are saying, because it's not worth fighting it, because the goal is to get done.
Sure. Head down.
Right. The goal is to appease them to,
Yep. A good dissertation is a
It's
finished
done
dissertation.
Right. I've heard this too.
Yes.
Whee!
Yes.
Yeah. We all feel that for several decades.
Yeah.
We will. Okay. So I think we've done a pretty good job of dissecting this. Do either of you have anything else that you want to add to this discussion of this film or this experience?
Here's one little tidbit. I looked up what $15 is in today's money.
Okay.
So $15 a day, and it is about $103 $2022. And, and that's an interesting amount of money for college students who are not working during the summer. Here's another question. Did the guards get the same amount of money? Because everybody was told they get $15 a day, but they only need to work 1/3 of the day. And the prisoners are there 24 hours of the day. And I've wondered, I've never seen anything about this, but I wondered about it. But, $103 to like a 19-year-old in the summer, that's kind of a fair amount of money. And I don't know that it crosses the line into coercion, but that's a principle of research ethics, is to make it fairly compensated, but not coercive. And so I thought that was an interesting, point. I mean, $103, if you're going to be there all day, for the prisoners, nothing's enough compensation. But for the 8 hours a day of the guards, that's more than minimum wage for sure. That's more than like good retail money.
Yeah, if they got the same amount for just 8 hours work, yeah. $15 was way better than anything that they were earning in 8 hours on an hourly wage, for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why they decided to join. Keli, you had noted that this is a good form of selection bias. People that needed the money were more apt to answer the ad.
Yeah, and people who weren't turned away from the concept of a study of prison life. I personally don't know if even for the money, if I would want to respond to an ad about that. I do want to make a plug for my colleague, Jared Bartels. He's done a lot of, he's done some scholarship on this study, on the critical thinking and issues behind this study. And he was invited to do an episode of Minefield, which is a show on YouTube TV. And they did a reenactment. But what they wanted to do, the reason they asked Jared to be involved, was they wanted him to identify some of the methodological flaws and see if we removed this idea that we're going to recruit a certain type of person who, would respond to a prison life ad. If you can still create the anonymity, do you see the same kind of results? And so they did a simulation where people were brought in and they thought they were competing against another team to solve a jigsaw puzzle. And they turned off all the lights and they were doing it in the dark, and they were able to, they didn't really deliver a buzz to the other team because there wasn't another team, but they thought they could deliver a buzz, a loud sound to the other team. And they purposefully recruited people who had positive personality traits, who were, generous and empathetic and things like that. And all of this stuff that you saw, like, that people would behave a certain way to get ahead, or that the power of the situation could turn you into an evil person and do bad things. None of that, was observed in this other demonstration. So I just want to make a plug. If you watch the Stanford Prison Experiment movie, it's really interesting to follow up with the Minefield episode on the study.
I watched that episode. I highly recommend that Minefield episode as well. I think there's a lot. It's very rich in it. And Keli, you can tell your colleague, Jared, I'm a huge fan. And I want to look at his published paper about intropsych. And, there's a lot there. And I thought it was a a very well done, especially for sort of pop press kind of thing, to delve into this world. And there's an interview with Zimbardo in it.
Yes.
And Zimbardo says, well, you got that because you selected the people for high moral characteristics. I had normal people in it. And he still talks about it as if they're results.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
He's hanging on to this. And he was so annoyed. Like, he was very annoyed about it.
He was.
Even, okay, so I have to push back on that. I have not had a chance to watch the episode that you're referring to, but it is on my list. I have to make a general comment about Zimbardo here, which is, he says I used normal people. Okay, fine. Then why I know our prisons in the United States are really shitty places, but why if people put in the situation are absolutely turned into evil, then why aren't all of our prisons burning down right now?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. He's extrapolating well beyond the confines of that basement.
And even if that basement had been an actual simulation of actual prison conditions, if they went variable by variable, like, what are their uniforms? How are the guards trained? What are the regulations for the guards? What is the food? Do people have their medications? All this. Even if they had done that, and even if, it's all this if, but it wasn't a proper study. It was complete manipulation.
Yeah,
they created a dramatic experience. I
don't think he has a leg to stand on when he critiques other people's explorations of this, because
he does not.
And I think he and Milgram, I've seen footage where they talk about, they were both really interested in, after Nazi Germany, they were really interested in how many citizens turned a blind eye to all of those atrocities, and they wanted to understand it. And I get that motivation. How could so many people let something like that happen and not do anything to try to stop it? But I don't think either one of them really did a well-designed study to be able to answer that.
They didn't answer that question.
But they didn't do any science to help explore it.
No, because if and Milgram has said that he was trying to specifically target the underlings who were actual officers as Nazis. So maybe not generally speaking the common German or Polish citizen who was not Jewish and allowed things to happen, but more or less, why'd you follow orders? So I get that, but extrapolating the conclusion beyond that and saying, why would the general populace have this much apathy? You can't make that conclusion from either of these studies. You can't say normal people do X when put in situation Y.
No, you can't.
And so he's sitting on here. He's sitting on his self-made throne.
Still hang on to it, and people still talk about it. And the problem is, students go through, if all they ever take in psychology is intro psych, and this is covered in the social psychology chapter as results, it's really problematic because they go out there and there are people who are suspicious, of psychology. And they're like, oh, they do these evil experiments, and this does nothing to help the cause. And I think what would help the cause is removing this from social psychology and only keeping it, this is my soapbox topic, is keeping it only in research ethics, because it was not a proper study. And like you have both talked about, there's so many more properly done modern studies to draw from that we can actually begin to draw conclusions. And this is not the place to go for that. And I find it really irresponsible that even after the exposés, okay, up through the exposés, okay, maybe I can say it. Now that the exposés have happened, this needs to be gone. And I would actually really like to see a movement in psychology, a protest, a large protest to say, get it out, stop calling it an experiment, sit in, get it out of the intro psych textbooks, get it out of the social psychology chapter, and only discuss it as an ethical violation.
I really appreciate the books that spend more time on recent research or research that we know was well done, when textbooks spend a lot of time devoted to Freud, it's the same kind of thing.
Ugh.
We don't want
Yeah.
our psychological science majors to have that, or even students who take 101 to have that impression of our discipline. And I think we need to move away from that. And I think some textbooks do a better job than others.
So I want to thank Drs. Keli Braitman and Jen Simonds for joining me today to discuss the Stanford Prison Experiment, so named because of the film. And so before we go, what are some things that are going on in your world that you'd like to plug for the listeners here?
I would like to encourage anyone listening who is a teacher of psychology to check out Division 2 of APA. It's Society for the Teaching of Psychology. Membership is at most $25, depending on your status.
It's
and
very
the
expensive.
society gives out, and they give out, there's so many different awards and grants and travel grants that you can apply for. So there's a lot of resources, a lot of networking opportunities, and just an amazing organization. So I would encourage people to check that out.
Great, Keli. And Jen?
Great. Well, I know that a number of faculty grapple with academic integrity and academic misconduct issues. And to get to the modern forefront, I recommend academicintegrity.org, which is the International Center for Academic Integrity. There are a lot of wonderful resources there to support approaching students in a learning-focused way around things that are not criminal behavior that sometimes get discussed as criminal behavior. But I think it's just excellent resources, because I know faculty can really sometimes feel like they're on their own, and depending on what their institutional processes are or policies are, there's a lot of great support and community in the academic integrity larger community.
That's great, Jen. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so that is awesome. STP, academic integrity, wonderful plugs. So I hope that I can see you both soon. And it was definitely a pleasure talking to you both.
Same here. Thanks,
Thank you,
Alex and
Alex.
Jen.
And that's going to do it for this episode. Until the next one, y'all, thanks for listening.